Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Josh and we are continuing with our series, The History of South Africa. The Union of South Africa between 1910 and 1948. During the years immediately following the Anglo-Boer Wars, Britain set about unifying the four colonies, including the former Boer republics, into a single self-governed country called the Union of South Africa. This was accomplished after several years of negotiations when the South African Act of 1909 consolidated the Cape Colony, Natal, Transvaal and Orange Free State into one nation. Under the provisions of the Act, the Union became an independent dominion of the British Empire, governed under a form of constitutional monarchy, with the British monarch represented by a Governor-General. Prosecutions before the courts of the Union of South Africa were instituted in the name of the Crown, and government officials served in the name of the Crown. The British High Commission territories of Basutoland, now Lesotho, Bechuanaland, now Botswana, and Swaziland, now Eswatini, continued under the direct rule of Britain. Among other harsh segregationist laws, including denial of voting rights to black people, the Union Parliament enacted in 1913 Natives Land Act, which embarked only 8% of South Africa's available land for black occupancy. White people, who constituted 20% of the population, held 90% of the land. The Land Act would form a cornerstone of legalized racial discrimination for the next 9 decades. General Louis Botha headed the first government of the new union, with General Jan Smuts as his deputy. The South African National Party, better known as the South African Party or SAP, followed a generally pro-British white unity line. The more radical Boers split away under the leadership of General Harry Herzog, forming the National Party in 1914. The National Party championed Afrikaner interests, advocating separate development for the two white groups and independence from Britain. Dissatisfaction with British influence in the Union's affairs reached a climax in September 1914, when impoverished Boers, anti-British Boers and bitter enders launched a rebellion. The rebellion was suppressed, and at least one officer was sentenced to death and executed by a firing squad. In 1924, the Afrikaner-dominated National Party came to power in a coalition government with the Labour Party. Afrikaans, previously regarded as a low-level Dutch pathos, replaced Dutch as an official language of the Union. English and Dutch became two official languages in 1925. The Union of South Africa came to an end after a referendum on the 5th of October 1960, in which a majority of the white South Africans voted in favour of a unilateral withdrawal from the British Commonwealth and the establishment of a Republic of South Africa. The First World War. At the outbreak of World War I, South Africa joined Great Britain and the Allies against the German Empire. Both Prime Minister Louis Botha and Defence Minister Jan Smuts were former Second Boer War generals who had previously fought against the British, but now they became active and respected members of the Imperial War Cabinet. Elements of the South African Army refused to fight against the Germans, and along with other opponents of the government, they rose in an open revolt known as the Maritz Rebellion. The government declared martial law on the 14th of October 1914, and forces loyal to the government under the command of General Louis Botha and Jan Smuts defeated the rebellion. The rebel leaders were prosecuted, heavily fined, and sentenced to imprisonment ranging from 6 to 7 years. Public opinion in South Africa was split along racial and ethnic lines. The British elements strongly supported the war, and formed by far the largest military component. Likewise, the Indian element, led by Mahatma Gandhi, generally supported the war effort. Afrikaners were split, with some like Botha and Smuts taking a prominent leadership role in the British war effort. The position was rejected by many rural Afrikaners who supported the Maurits rebellion. The trade union movement was divided. Many urban blacks supported the war, expecting it would raise their status in society. Others said it was not relevant to the struggle for their rights. The coloured element was generally supportive, and many served in coloured corps in East Africa and France, also hoping to better themselves after the war. With a population of roughly 6 million between 1914 and 1918, over 250,000 South Africans of all races voluntarily served their country. Thousands more served in the British Army directly, with over 3,000 joining the British Royal Flying Corps and over 100 volunteering for the Royal Navy. It is likely that around 50% of white men of military age served during the war. More than 146,000 whites, 83,000 blacks, and 2,500 colours and Asians also served in either German, South-West Africa, East Africa, the Middle East, or on the Western Front in Europe. Over 7,000 South Africans were killed and nearly 12,000 were wounded during the course of the war. 8 South Africans won the Victoria Cross for gallantry, the Empire's highest and prestigious military medal. The Battle of Delville Wood and the sinking of the SS Mendi being the greatest single incidence of loss of life. 25,000 black South Africans were recruited at the request of the British War Cabinet to serve as non-combatant labourers in the South African Native Labour Contingent, SANLC. 21,000 of them were deployed to France as stevedores at French ports, where they were housed in segregated compounds. A total of 616 men from the 5th Battalion of the SANLC drowned on the 21st of February 1917 when the troop ship SS Mendi, on which they were being transported to France, collided with another vessel near the Isle of Wight. The Mendi disaster was one of South Africa's worst tragedies of the Great War, second perhaps only to the Battle of Delville Wood. The South African government issued no war service medal to the black servicemen, and the special medal issued by King George V to native troops that served the Empire, the British War Medal in bronze, was disallowed and not issued to the SANLC. Black and mixed race South Africans who had supported the war were embittered when post-war South Africa saw no easing of white domination and racial segregation. The assistance that South Africa gave the British Empire was significant. 2 German African colonies were occupied, either by South Africa alone or with significant South African assistance. Manpower from all races helped Allied operations not just on the Western Front and Africa, but also in the Middle East against the Ottoman Empire. South Africa's ports and harbours on the home front were a crucial strategic asset when conducting a war on a global scale, providing important rest and refueling stations. The Royal Navy could ensure vital sea lane connections to the British Raj, and the Far East stayed open. Economically, South Africa supplied 2/3 of gold production in the British Empire, with the most of the remainder coming from Australia. At the start of the war, the Bank of England officials in London worked with South Africa to block gold shipments to Germany and force mine workers to sell only to the British Treasury at prices set by the Treasury. This facilitated purchases of munitions and food in the United States and neutral countries. The Second World War. During World War II, South Africa's ports and harbours, such as Cape Town, Durban and Simonstown, were important strategic assets to the British Royal Navy. South Africa's top-secret Special Signal Service displayed a significant role in the early development and deployment of radio detection and ranging, or radar, technology used in protecting the vital coastal shipping route around southern Africa. By August 1945, South African Air Force aircraft, in conjunction with British and Dutch aircraft stationed in South Africa, had intercepted 17 enemy ships, assisted in the rescue of 437 survivors of sunken ships, attacked 26 of the 36 enemy submarines operating in the vicinity of the South African coast, and flown 15,000 coastal patrol sorties. About 334,000 South Africans volunteered for full-time military service in support of the Allies abroad. Nearly 9,000 were killed in action. On June 21st, 1942, nearly 10,000 South African soldiers, representing one-third of the entire South African force in the field, were taken prisoner by German Field Marshal Rommel's forces in the fall of Tobruk, Libya. A number of South African fighter pilots served with distinction in the Royal Air Force during the Battle of Britain, including Group Captain Adolf Sailor Malan, who led 74 Squadron and established a record of personally destroying 27 enemy aircraft. General Jan Smuts was the only important non-British general whose advice was constantly sought by Britain's wartime minister Winston Churchill. Smuts was invited to the Imperial War Cabinet in 1939 as the most senior South African in favour of war. On the 28th of May 1941, Smuts was appointed a Field Marshal of the British Army, becoming the first South African to hold that rank. When the war ended, Smuts represented South Africa in San Francisco with the drafting of the United Nations Charter in 1945. Just as he had done in 1919, Smuts urged the delegates to create a powerful international body to preserve peace. He was determined that, unlike the League of Nations, the UN would have teeth. Smuts also signed the Paris Peace Treaty, resolving the peace in Europe, thus becoming the only signatory of both the treaty ending the First World War and that which ended the Second. Pro-German and pro-Nazi attitudes. After the suppression of the abortive pro-German Maritz rebellion during the South African World War I campaign against German Southwest Africa in 1914, the South African rebel general Manie Maritz escaped to Spain. He returned in 1923 and continued working in the Union of South Africa as a German spy for the Third Reich. In 1896, the German Kaiser Wilhelm, that enraged Britain by sending congratulations to Boer Republican leader Paul Kruger after Kruger's commandos captured a column of British South African Company soldiers, engaged in an armed incursion and abortive insurrection, known historically as the Jameson Raid, into Boer territory. Germany was the primary supplier of weapons to the Boers during the subsequent Anglo-Boer War. Kaiser Wilhelm's government arranged for the two Boer republics to purchase modern breech-loading Mauser rifles and millions of smokeless gunpowder cartridges. Germany's Ludwig Luer Company, later known as the Deutsche Waffen- und Munitionfabriken, delivered 55,000 of these rifles to the Boers in 1896. The early 1940s saw the pro-Nazi Ossewa Brandwacht (OB) movement become 500,000 strong, including future Prime Minister John Vorster and Hendrik van der Berg, the future head of the police intelligence. The anti-Semitic Boerenasie, Boer Nation, and other similar groups soon joined them. When the war ended, the OB was one of the anti-parliamentary groups absorbed into the National Party. The South African Afrikaner Weerstandsbeweging, or AWB, meaning Afrikaner Resistance Movement, a military neo-Nazi, mainly Afrikaner white supremacist movement that arose in the 1970s and was active until the mid-1990s, openly used a flag that closely resembled the swastika. In the early to mid-1990s, the AWB attempted to unsuccessfully, through various acts of public violence and intimidation, to derail the country's transition to democracy. After the country's first multiracial democratic elections in 1994, a number of terrorist bomb blasts were linked to the AWB. On the 11th of March 1994, several hundred AWB members formed part of an armed right-wing force that invaded the nominally independent homeland territory of Botswana in a failed attempt to prop up its unpopular conservative leader, Chief Lucas Mangwophe. The AW leader, Eugene Terblanche, was murdered by farm workers on the 3rd of April 2010. A majority of the politically moderate Afrikaners were pragmatic and did not support the AWB's extremism. I'd like to thank you for listening so far. If you've enjoyed the videos, please hit the like button and be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so that YouTube can notify you as soon as there is a new video that comes up. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and stay strong.